Well, we've been in the Proverbs, I beg your pardon, the parables. Got my P's and Q's mixed up. In the parables quite a bit lately. And today we're going to take a reading from Luke and continue with another of Jesus' parables. In just a moment, Pat will share this with us. And so I invite her to come on up and find a microphone. But as you're thinking about this for a moment, remember, all of the parables sort of help you to walk around the entire subject of the kingdom of God and our relationship with our Father in heaven. No parable is complete in of itself the total and absolute picture. So as you listen to the words, begin to take something from this story, and then let's excavate it together. Pat, if you'd like to read for us.
There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. At his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. So he called to him, "Father Abraham, have pity on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I am in agony in this fire." But Abraham replied, "Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, while Lazarus received bad things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. And besides all of this, between us and you, a great chasm has been set in place, so that those who want to go from here to you cannot, nor can anyone cross over from there to us." He answered, "Then I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my family, for I have 5 brothers. Let him warn them, so that they will not also come to this place of torment." Abraham replied, "They have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them." "No, Father Abraham," he said, "but if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent." He said to them, "If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead."
And Jesus spun this yarn, and in its original context, you can imagine the audience standing around trying to, oh, what's he getting at? What's he trying to say? Is he talking to me? No, he couldn't be talking to me. And so as we come to this story, we certainly are immediately struck by the fact that the rich man has a heart that cannot be touched. You'd have to admit that. Because we begin to read about 2 persons. A rich man who is dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. Now, that reference, purple and fine linen, it invokes the picture of somebody who is privileged, wealthy, obviously. He can, in fact, afford fine linen for his inner garments. The priests were very specifically told to dress in a particular way, and they had to be very clean and the highest quality to represent God. And the additional detail here is that he lives in luxury every day. He has 3 square meals a day and a cot. And in addition to that, he has servants, people who wait on him, people who care for him. And as Roger Miller once said, both hands on the wheel and your shoulders right back. He is cruising down the highway of life, and he feels confident because he has abundance that God must love him. Now, this is very typical of the time and place that Jesus is ministering. They believed firmly in the fact that riches and wealth were a sign of God's favor. And you can understand why, because the Old Covenant said, if you obey me, if you do certain things, the grapes will be fat, the grain will be plentiful, the cattle will be fruitful and multiply many times over, and even your wife or your wives will have many children. This is the way it'll work. And so it's easy to first of all, understand how this individual has a sense of, well, I'm doing okay. It's also, unfortunately, contributes to a sense of privilege, entitlement, and just he's hardwired to believe that what he has is what he deserves, and what Lazarus has, well, I guess that's what he deserves. It's ironic, though, that in this story, Jesus does not name the rich man. But speaking as God, he names the poor man, the beggar. He gives him a name, and the name, roughly translated, means he who God helps. And we read that at his gate is laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores, longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. Now, that's an interesting picture as well, because in our culture, we eat with a knife and fork, okay? Unless it's an apple or an orange or something. In many cultures, eating with your fingers is typical. Indian, Lebanese, many Middle Eastern cultures. This individual, like Jesus at the Last Supper, was used to taking a piece of bread, dipping it in a bowl, hummus, or whatever else was in there, and putting it in his mouth. Now, that's a little bit, with all due respect, a little bit sloppier way of eating. Although, to be blunt, I've managed to get gravy on my tie without any help. Any of you ever done that? Yeah, okay, all right. It's true, on occasion I eat with my fingers. If I have to pick up a chicken bone, if I have to pick up a Big Mac, if I have to pick up the fries. I guess I eat with my fingers quite a bit, don't I? Anyway, you're getting the picture here. And especially in this culture, there would be, beards were quite common. Very, very common, because it was a real pain to try to shave. And if you have a beard, okay, maybe Gene could elaborate on this. I'm just teasing you. You tend to get a little stuff, hummus or whatever in your beard, right? How do you get rid of that? Well, flatbread, which I would call pita bread, is great for dipping in a bowl. It's also great for stuffing it, if you're making a falafel. And also, if it's dry flatbread, which I've seen Bedouins make. In fact, I went to a Bedouin cafe in the Sinai many, many years ago, and they were selling flatbread. And I went around the back and peeked over the fence, and they were literally baking it on the top of an oil drum that had been cut off, the top of the oil drum. And it was over an open fire, and I was just flabbergasted. Health regulations did not exist at the Bedouin Cafe. But that's the way bread is made, over a stone or something like that. How do you get the gunk out of your beard? You just take a piece of that dry bread and you wipe the beard with it. And then you drop the bread with whatever gunk comes off your beard for the dogs. That's what the dogs could eat. And so the beggar named Lazarus, he's got physical problems, difficulties, and he yearns to eat what falls from the rich man's table. The only place he receives compassion is from the dogs that come and lick his sores. Now, I have never lived with a dog. I've lived when I was younger with a cat, when I was older with a cat. And as you both know, cats are, how can I put it tactfully, given to a little bit of arrogance, Come here, sweetheart, Yeah. Go the other way. Cats will usually give you a little attitude, show you the south end as they go north, this sort of thing. What'll dogs do? Well, basically, dogs will come up and they'll try to please you. As Churchill said, cats look down on you, dogs look up to you. The good news is pigs treat you as equals, but that was the quote. But here are the dogs. They're the only ones. And the underlying little story here would be that the Jews referred to the unchosen, the unwashed, the Gentiles, everybody else, as dogs. Now, they didn't use that terminology all the time, but you read in Paul's epistles that he will occasionally say, you Jews, you think you're so much better than the dogs of the Gentiles. That was the word. And so here the implication is the only place he gets any type of succor and comfort is from the dogs. Maybe they're the master's guard dogs, but they come up and they lick his hand, and in their own little way, they comfort him. And dogs would do that. I remember years ago, any of you old enough that you remember gramophone records? Okay, a few of us do. There used to be a label called His Master's Choice, or His Master's Voice, I remember. And it had the picture of a dog just sitting there listening to the, Vitrola, the gramophone, which was a recording of his master's voice and responding to that. And so dogs will be very loyal. They will even sit on their master's grave after the master is gone and yearn and pine for somebody they loved. And so this is the picture you get. The only people who are nice to him are maybe the Gentiles occasionally, but the dogs will come and show him a little bit of compassion. Certainly, he's not going to get any from the rich man. Now, as a beggar, he's very vulnerable. And it tells us the time came when the beggar died. And the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. Now, nobody mourned for the beggar. Nobody, in fact, buried him. The only person who cared enough for this guy was God, who sent his angels to carry him. This is the picture. However, the rich man, when he died, he's buried. It's a formal occasion. People stand up and talk about how amazing he was, how much he did for the community, how open-hearted he was when he threw his money into the coffers, things like that. Everybody with ceremony and fond memories remembers this guy because, well, I'm sure he did a certain amount of good. And his rich friends certainly showed up. It was a chance to network, a chance to compare stories, a chance to do a business deal or two, this type of thing. But who cares about the death of a beggar? Kind of invokes the tragedy that we've seen in Ukraine. Just open graves where soldiers came through, tortured some people, picked up the bodies of those who've been hurt and destroyed by artillery shells or whatever, just threw them into an open grave, and then covered it up as they fled the scene. And now all those crimes are being uncovered. And this is the sort of implication you're getting from this story. Now, in Hades, or in the grave, where he was in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. Now, the Jewish perception was that after death, you sort of sleep, or maybe there's an awareness in the time of the resurrection. But the Old Testament is pretty vague about any of this. There's a hope, all right? There's a hope that eventually something will take place, but there's nothing specific. There's nothing clear. There's just this essential, well, maybe at the last day, this sort of thing, or definitely at the last day if you have faith. And so somehow or other, Jesus, speaking to the crowd, okay, speaking to those who are there, said there comes a time when there's frustration, when there's agony, because this individual looks up and sees Abraham, but he's far away. Now, to the typical Jew of the day, to pass through into whatever's the other side, you would pass through and be united with Father Abraham. As Paul says, he's the father of the faithful. He is the one who, because of his relationship with God, brought blessings down upon Isaac, Jacob, and the children of Israel. So where do we trace our blessings to? All the way back to Father Abraham, God's friend. And so he assumes he's going to be with God's friend. But no, this is not happening. And this begins to echo a number of other stories Jesus told, where he spoke about that day when God will judge all of humanity through the Son of Man, and there will be weeping, frustration, gnashing of teeth. In those stories, people just sort of walk away into outer darkness and oblivion. And so when we read about the grave and torment, we can't get too graphic and too specific about the fact that this is clearly a picture of hell, which is full of fire, because other parables and other narratives will say, no, it's darkness, it's gloom and doom and oblivion. And so let's not take too much of our preconceived ideas from this, but realize that there is judgment. As Paul put it simply, it is appointed all man wants to die. After that, judgment. discernment of where things shake out. And Jesus is predicting certain things. And when he looks up and sees Lazarus by the side of Abraham, in Abraham's bosom, and of course in that culture, we have certain concepts, certain sense of personal space, right? Maybe we could understand John at the Last Supper, let's say, leaning on Jesus' shoulder or on his bosom, this sort of thing. Maybe we can understand a heartfelt handshake or an embrace, but we don't spend a lot of time. We have traditionally something like 3 feet distance between us. That's about the way we operate. If you're in Latin America, Mexico, it's like 18 inches. If you're in England, it's 5 feet at least. All right? And no, I won't even make jokes about Europe, okay? Things change from culture to culture, okay? The French are a particular way. Some cultures you kiss on one cheek. Some cultures you kiss on 2 cheeks. And then in others, in Arab cultures, it's 3 cheeks. You got to remember which one you start with, right? Okay, is it 1, 2, 3, or is it 1, 2, 3? Also, if you're in an Arab culture, it's not unusual to see men holding hands. It's quite normal. If that happened here, we'd say, different, but non-judgmental. In the same culture, where men might hold hands, if you held hands with a woman, that would be considered promiscuous. You don't do that in public. And so, in this particular context, in this particular time and place, for Lazarus to be in a close, intimate relationship with Abraham is reassuring, and it communicates all the right messages. He is safe, he is well, he is right there with the Father of the faithful. How did he get there? Last time I saw him, he was lying there. I walked past him a few times, covered in sores. The dogs licked him, disgusting. And he begged for the bread that fell from my table. You remember when Jesus is up in Syrophoenicia, and a woman came to him and says, "Heal my child." And he said, "No." He said, "I can't do that. It's not fitting to give the children's food to dogs." Remember what he says? Ooh. And he's testing her a little bit. On the other hand, he's saying to his disciples, "Watch this. Watch this." And she says, "Well, even the dogs get the food that falls from the table." And he tells his disciples, you can't find that faith in Israel. And he heals the woman's child. Now, in this case, what is the rich man saying? You want bread? You want the fallings from my beard? That's what I feed the dogs. You don't deserve that. You don't need that. I can't give you that. I have my priorities. I'm hardwired for my way, my place, my time. It's been this way in my family from generation to generation to generation. And there's a very hard heart. But now he calls out to Father Abraham, Father Abraham, have pity on me and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I am in agony in this fire." That's interesting. In one sentence, he placed 2 things. Father Abraham, the race card, right? Have pity on me, the victim card. Suddenly, everything has changed. Perspective has changed. And he doesn't hesitate to milk the situation. I have needs. Send Lazarus. What do you mean, send Lazarus? He's not your servant. What do you mean? I was kind of expecting that you'd say, "Wow, did I have this backwards? Wow, did I screw up? I am so sorry that I walked past Lazarus year after year and used to despise him as unfit, unclean, not even worthy of occupying the same space as me." But no, he says, playing the race card, playing this victim card, send Lazarus. Send the great unwashed. Send this guy. Clearly he's been restored to health and strength. Clearly he glows with the radiance of somebody who is in your presence, Father Abraham. But clearly, he's still worthy of serving me. His health and strength has been restored. Good. He can do what he should have been doing all his life, serving me, recognizing me as worthy and justifiably requesting that he give to me, because that's the way it is. That's the way it's always been. Now, I won't draw too many parallels between that, but I know there are cultures that have caste systems. You've heard about that. And in the caste system, there, at the very bottom are the unwashed, the untouchables. And at the top are those who simply issue orders. My father issued orders, my mother had issued orders, my grandmother, my great-grandfather, and so on. I think I told you the story, and it's a very genuine story of a man of some wealth and means who went back to India to find a wife. He's a lovely individual, functioning as a productive member of Canadian society, but he wanted to marry somebody from India. So he went back, and when he got there, he connected with extended family and friends, met a lovely young lady, and after a while, he proposed to her. And he said, I live in Canada, I do very well in Canada, but it's going to be different for you. Can you understand that in Canada, you won't have a servant to make your food? You'll make your food. Oh, okay, I can do that. You will eat your food. I can do that. And then you will take the dishes to the dishwasher yourself. And you will pre-rinse, and then you'll put them in the dishwasher. I can do that. When you go shopping, you will not have somebody take you shopping. You will get into a car, and I have like 3 or 4 of them. You can have the Maserati, or you can have the Toyota, whatever you want, but you will drive yourself, probably to Costco, because I know how to hang on to money, but you're going to go there, and you're going to buy for yourself. Well, I can do that. I can do that. You won't have a driver. You won't have a personal shopper. Unless, of course, you call up Uber or something like that and say, bring me groceries. So they were married. He brought her to Canada, and she lasted 3 weeks. Couldn't do it. I got to go back to India. Now, that is the difference between those who grow up in that culture with very substantial wealth and recognize that there are those who grew up in that culture whose definition of life is to serve us. Now, it's not quite that extreme. It never was quite that extreme in England. But at least in my youth, there was always an understanding that you keep your place. You keep your place. I have cousins, God bless them, who are lovely people. And they were blessed to have parents who had more money than mine. So they went to, quote, private schools. Or actually in England, what we call a private school is a public school. And they went to boarding schools. And they asked my uncle once, I said, why do you send Nick and Marianne to a boarding school? Because I went to the state school. And he said, well, you got to remember, Robert, they go to school with the Archbishop's son, the Member of Parliament's daughter, and he named 4 or 5 individuals who had influence and prestige in society. And he said, those are the people they will mix with. The irony of it was myself, my sister, and eventually my brother, we all went to university. My cousin Patrick, he wanted to be a welder and a farmer. He didn't bother with university. He was smart enough to figure out where the money was. So he went farming in England, okay? My other cousin, he went pipelining. My other cousin, she became a flight attendant for British Air. They went in those directions. Didn't waste any time on university. Nick was the only one. I remember talking to my cousin Christopher, who had gone to private school, and asking him, what are you doing? And he said, I'm attending college in Oxford. Sounded very impressive. He said, but it's agricultural college in Oxford. In other words, something practical that I'm doing. And of course, he's done extremely well. So this whole business of hardwiring certain things in changed significantly after I left England, because along came a lady by the name of Margaret Thatcher, who was a greengrocer's daughter, who said, enough of this stuff. Class is a false way of defining people. And so my brother and sister, who are significantly younger, grew up with a significantly different ethos. My cousins who lived in public housing were told, hey, you can buy the house. You can invest in your own home, things like that. Things changed. But if you're a little older and you're familiar with the world works, then you know that in times past, there are those who would simply assume that I don't care if your name is He Who God Helps. You were born to serve me. And that, even beyond the grave, is the way of thinking. Hey, send him over. My mouth is dry. Interesting you say that. The 1 week there's no water. That's okay. I'm just teasing you. I got the old frog in the throat there. But this is the way, and there is torment, there's agony, there's frustration. I'm torn. There is, in the words of Matthew 24:25, weeping and gnashing of teeth. This isn't the way it's supposed to be. I am entitled. This is the way it should work, but it's not. But Abraham replied, and it's kind of ironic. He says, son. Oh, so you acknowledge certain things there, son, but it's ironic. Remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, while Lazarus received bad things. But now he is comforted here, and you're in agony. Now, you can misinterpret this if you choose, and you could say, well, he's being condemned because he had money. Well, that doesn't make sense. Abraham had lots of money, but he was considered a friend of God. Abraham was a trader. Typically people didn't have money. What they had was sheep and goats and camels and things like that. But if you're a trader and you're negotiating a deal, you are going to perhaps take something in response. Okay, I'll take your bull. You can have this one. That'll be good genetically for your herd, or this ram, good for your flock. But we got to make a bit of a deal here. I've traveled a long way, so what are you going to throw in? Well, I'll throw in a few coins. And so there were always coins being added by the people that Abraham was serving. So that's how he amassed a certain amount of wealth. And he was a very wealthy man, but he was never condemned for that. It didn't hurt his reputation. But, thank you, sir. Thank you. Here we have, you could condemn the guy for all sorts of things. Purple clothing, there's nothing wrong with that. Linen, the priests were commanded to dress in that way. But Jesus is pointing out to them, look, you place a lot of value in these things. And you seem to feel as though there's an entitlement that goes along with this. It's not true, people. It's not true. Now, very specifically, he is talking to a ruling class here. Okay, the purple significance, minor royalty or priesthood or anything like that. The fine linen, you got money, you got status, you got prestige. This guy, nothing. But ironically, I know his name. You remember what Jesus says in other contexts? He said, not one sparrow falls, but I know where it is. My Father in heaven knows every one of those birds. I can relate to that because our backyard is a bit of a sanctuary for birds. And if there are wicked birds that come in, there's a catapult and a pellet gun available. And if they're gracious birds that need protecting, they get all sorts of grace and favor. So in a way, I live with God. No, anyway, okay. You're going to learn that from your backyard. And this is what Jesus is saying. Now, I knew Lazarus by name, even during the difficult times. I'm sure Lazarus during those times thought, where is God during my time of trial and need? Where is God when these sores hurt? Where is God? Where is God? Where is God? Big temptation to ask that. Constant pressure to ask that during times of trouble and difficulty. And Lazarus apparently lives in hope. And that hope at his death is not recognized by the neighbors. He doesn't have any friends, but God sends angels to pick him up and leaves the rich man in the grave. This is the picture that's being drawn. And so Abraham says, besides all this, between us and you, a great chasm has been set in place. So those who want to go from here to you cannot, nor can anyone cross over from there to us. Now, the definition of this chasm is up for grabs. A lot of people will speculate, I mean, is it death? You go one way or the other, up or down. That's not what it says. I would suggest to you that you compare this with other stories that Jesus tells. And I would suggest that there are those who come to Jesus in those parables and stories and argue, didn't we do this? Didn't we do this? Didn't we do this? Didn't we cast out demons? You know, the priests would pray and do these things. And Jesus says, you know, leave. I never knew you. And they would turn away with weeping and gnashing of teeth. Why? What is the chasm? My refusal to recognize that you're God and I'm not. My refusal to accept that I need your grace, your forgiveness, your favor. And I'm just as desperately poverty-stricken spiritually as Lazarus the beggar. I'm just as desperately in need of the crumbs that fall from your table as the Phoenician woman. And I confess that. But he can't, and he doesn't, and he won't. And as a result of that, he says, just send him over. Help me. And Jesus is pointing out, no, there's a chasm between us. What is that chasm? I have received Lazarus. I can't receive you because you don't want any of my reception. You don't recognize your need for my grace, my favor. You don't think I need to justify you, make you upright, make you straight and true. You don't recognize any of that. And here you are, again, playing the sympathy card. Then I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my family. And this is an interesting twist because Jesus now says, in the words of this rich man, okay, we'll give him a little favor here. We'll pretend that he has empathy for his immediate family. I have 5 brothers. Let him warn them so that they will not also come to this place of torment. Now, you can interpret this many different ways, but the best interpretation I ever heard was this. Caiaphas, the high priest, had 5 brothers. Caiaphas and his cabal were the ones who, when Jesus quite literally resurrected Lazarus from the grave, said, man, we got to put him back to death right away. Who would think that way? You know, if God blessed Gene with the power to fly, okay, I'd say fantastic. You know, you can, skip the dishes real easily. I'd solicit favor. I'd become Gene's best friend. You can just, can you help me fly? Yeah, I grab you by the hand and we can fly together. Okay? It would be as stupid as me saying, no, this is a wonderful gift that God has given you. Let me tie a rope around your ankle so you don't use it. Let me tie you to the ground. Now consider the stupidity and how the thinking goes awry when Jesus resurrects Lazarus from the dead. And he waits long enough so that there's no argument about it. After 3 days, you argue that the soul has left the body and there's nothing left. Well, that was their theology. After 3 days, you argue that he stinks. That was their understanding of being mortal. Let me wait long enough so that the soul is gone from the body and the body's decaying. And let me show you the power of God in and through me. And that's what Jesus did. That's why when the stone is rolled away, he gives thanks. Why doesn't he wait until Lazarus steps out? Why does he, Father, thank you for hearing my prayer? Because he's not hit in the face with the stench of a decaying corpse. That's why. He knows Lazarus is alive in there. What happened? What happened? What are all these things on me for? And Lazarus steps forth, and Caiaphas and his cabal and his 5 brothers say what? We got to send him back where he came from. And all of those predictions about the Messiah rising on the 3rd day, we got to get the Romans to seal that sucker. Because if anything happens, then we're done for. That's their mentality. And so, when he says, I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my family, for I have 5 brothers. He's not worried about the sisters, not worried about the wives and the in-laws, but my 5 brothers, we're a macho family. Let him warn them so they will not also come to this terrible place of frustration and agony and torment and everything else. Well, Jesus responds to him, and this is the narrative. Abraham replied, they have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them. And now the response is, no, Father Abraham, he said, but if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent. Oh, really? Really? They can't hear Moses? They can't hear the prophets? They can't hear my disciples? They can't hear me? And the response now in the words, in the mouth of Abraham, Jesus places these words. If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead. And that, of course, was the response of many when they heard that Jesus had risen himself from the dead. Didn't matter. We are the establishment. We are the entitled ones. We have a mindset that says, you draw your own parallel. Me, Tarzan, you, Jane. Remember it. I'm the man, you're the peon. I am born to this status, you're not. Deal with it. And so this persistent idea. Now, you could take from this that Jesus is simply asking us to have a compassionate heart. And there's nothing wrong with that lesson at all, which is why I entitled the sermon, The Heart That Can Be Touched. Because entitlement, status, prestige, all the things in your life that reconfirm that I don't need to worry about others, well, that's a terrible burden to bear spiritually. We can't be spiritually blind to the needs of others. But in this particular story, Jesus is not emphasizing our need to run out and, we know the terrible imbalance we have in society. I was talking to Bill Hall recently, and Bill was the director of the food bank in North Battleford. And at one particular point, the hotel, which was behind the food bank, approached him and said, we're going out of business. It's an old hotel and whatever. He said, well, how would it be if we donated this property to the society that runs the food bank? Somebody gives you a hotel. Have you ever fantasized what you'd do if you won, the lottery? I've wondered about that. What would I do if I came into 60, 70, 80 million dollars? And my heart is moved when I see people, as I did this past week again, living in tents in back alleys. And I wonder why they do that. I went to pick up my son here. It was his birthday this last week. And he had to go and get his license renewed. So I went to pick him up because, our vehicles are in jeopardy right now. And there were some young people dumpster diving in the back alley behind his apartment. And I'm looking at people who probably are reasonably intelligent, but they're wallowing around in garbage and filth. But that's what they choose to do. That's what they want to do. And fishing out old clothing, things like that. And then getting on a reasonably decent-looking bicycle and bicycling away. And you say, well, what fuels that mentality? Why are they doing that? And I've fantasized about if I was king of the world, if I had money, what would I do? And you think, well, just taking an apartment building and setting it up so that homeless people would have a home. And that's exactly the offer that the food bank in North Battleford received. Here, we're going to give you a building. And so they sat around with their board of trustees and tried to figure out what they would do with this building. All they had to do was write a receipt for a charitable donation. And finally they said, we can't accept it. Shock? Can't you do something for people who are in distress? And they realized that they couldn't cope with the attitudes, the problems, the difficulties that came with people who, and I have another friend, by the way, who lives, I beg your pardon, works, renovating apartments for people who are low income and receiving subsidized housing. And people come in, 3 months later move out maybe. And, it's impossible to understand how somebody can do like $4,000 or $5,000 worth of damage in 4 or 5 weeks. But they can, because there are emotional and spiritual problems, there are physical problems, there are addictions and so forth that are very, very difficult to cope with. And so Jesus is not laying out for us a mandate to run out and solve the world's problems. There are times when we have an opportunity to do that. I'm a firm believer in helping anybody who comes my way and helping them get a hand up. In fact, it was just yesterday approached by my buddy Steve, and he said he knew of 2 young single mothers who were very urgently looking for work, and if I knew anybody who needed to hire painters, he said, these guys are really good, but they need opportunity. And so I hear about this all the time, and I hear other people looking for help. But there's a huge difference between giving somebody a hand up and being able to just sustain people through what it often degenerates into criminal activities and all sorts of dysfunctional behavior that produces damage and hurt and danger to other people. And that's not what Jesus is saying to me right here and right now. But what he is saying is, first of all, do you ever feel that there's anybody totally beneath you? I mean, I confess, I asked, what are these young people dumpster diving out back of my son's apartment building for? But, okay, that's their choice. That's what they choose to do. And obviously they're sober enough today to get on a bicycle and cycle away. And it didn't invoke in me a desire to despise them or say, well, I guess God has already written them off. Okay, I've had some disappointing circumstances with people in need who've rented property from me. And most of the time when I've extended myself or offered comfort or service, it's kind of responded. Several people have asked me to perform their weddings. I find opportunity to help. There's lots of that. But not every circumstance and situation equals Lazarus. And so as I walk through life like you, I have to make value judgments. I have to make decisions. I have to wonder. But the biggest challenge that Jesus is laying out for me is, do you have a hard heart? Do you look out your front gate and see people and say, well, they are unworthy of my prayers, my concern. They are unworthy of my words of encouragement if they ever approach me. They are just human trash. Because Jesus apparently knows them by name. And I don't want to ever be in a situation where Jesus says, hey, is it Robert or Bob? How did you go? And then turns to someone else, whatever their name, and says, can you remember his name? Because it may be one of those circumstances where they would say, yeah, I was in a tight situation and he gave me a word of encouragement. I was in a frustrating circumstance and he actually stopped long enough and shared a piece of bread with me. Those are just challenging daily circumstances that make up my Christian journey, my Christian life. And I also have to remember that I, at the end of the day, am Lazarus. I am Lazarus. And that Jesus, in his compassion, has opened his heart to me. And he has given me his grace, his favor. He has given me his peace, which is kind of, sometimes difficult to understand. But he's given me the peace that passes understanding and given me a secure footing as I go through this world. And he's promised me the bosom of Father Abraham. And to Father Abraham, he has promised the bosom of the Messiah himself. So we're all in the same place. And even though it's draped in cultural references, I don't want to be found on the side of the guy wearing purple and fine linen. I want to be found standing next to the weak and the infirm, because frankly, that's where I came from. And if we're honest with ourselves, that's where we all came from. So, whatever the circumstances that are dogging you down in life, whatever the frustrations, whatever the hurts, just remember, Jesus knows you by name, by name. And he gives you the reassurance that even though you may be feeling, as we say in the vernacular, so low that you're lower than a snake's belly, maybe you're feeling at times the only people in the world who care about you are dogs. Well, Jesus still does. And he has demonstrated that. And as you come back around and recognize that, rest assured his angels are still with you, and his angels will, at the appropriate time, carry you into glory. And that will be the answer to every problem in this life. Let's put that into our minds and our hearts this coming week and try to think constructively about whatever the circumstances. Thank you, Lord, that I, even though I was Lazarus, will be in your care for eternity. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, as we walk through this world, we ask that you give us wisdom and discretion to conduct ourselves, that you give us insight and understanding. May we never be so hard-hearted that we despise others. May we never be so foolish that we fail to exercise your judgment and your compassion, your mercy and your discretion and your wisdom. But as we go through, may we never lose sight of the fact that we once were Lazarus, and you have already caused us to stand and to be glorified in your presence and to anticipate everlasting life with you. We thank you for that, and we ask your comfort and your care and the power to share that with others this coming week. And we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.